Oh, the Rebbe said, while on the journey I told a story, and whoever heard it had a thought of repentance. This is the story. There was a king who had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Now this daughter was very precious to him, showing her much affection and enjoying her company very much. Once though, while he was alone with her on a certain day, he got angry with her. He got angry with her and mindlessly said, "May the no good one take you away. May the no good one, may the no good one take you away." That evening she went to her room, but in the morning she was nowhere to be found. Her father was extremely distressed and went to search for her all over. Seeing how distressed the king was, the viceroy approached and requested. Seeing how distressed the king was, the viceroy approached and requested to be given a servant, a horse, and expense money, and he set out to seek her. He sought her for a very long time until he found her. Now the Rebbe tells us how he sought her until he found her. Oh, he sought all over for a long time, in the wildernesses, in the fields, and in the forests. He searched for a very long time. He was once going in the wilderness, and he saw a path going off to one side, and he thought to himself, "Since I've been traveling for so long in the wilderness, and have been unable to find her, let me follow this path. Oh, perhaps I will reach civilization. Perhaps I will reach civilization." So he continued for a long time. Eventually, he reached a castle, which was surrounded by many soldiers. The soldiers gave the castle a very dignified, orderly, and stately appearance. He feared that the soldiers would not let him in, but he said to himself, "Let me go and try." So he left his horse behind and walked up to the castle. They let him in without any delay. He then walked about from room to room without interference until he reached a ballroom in which the king sat with his crown. There were many soldiers there with musicians playing before the king. It was very pleasant and beautiful there, and neither the king nor anyone else asked him any questions. Then noticed delicacies and other tasty foods. So he went over and ate, and then went over to lie down in a corner to see what would happen. And saw that the king had ordered to bring in the queen. They went to fetch her, and there was great commotion and great joy. The musicians played and sang enthusiastically, since the queen was being brought in. A throne was set for her, and she was seated next to the king. The viceroy recognized her as the princess that he was seeking. The queen then noticed someone lying in the corner. She recognized him. So she got up from her throne and went over there. Touching him, she asked, "Do you recognize me?" "Certainly I recognize you," he answered. "You are the lost princess." He then asked her, "How did you get in? How did you get in?" She answered, "Since my father, the king, said what he said. This here is the place of no good. This here is the place of no good." They told her how her father was so distressed, and that he has been searching for her for many He asked her, "Can I get you out of here?" She told him, there is no way for you to get me out of here. Other than by your choosing a place to remain there for an entire year. And throughout this year, you must yearn to get me out of here. Whenever you have a spare moment, you must only yearn. Say, can't anticipate getting me out. You must only yearn. Say, you can't anticipate getting me out. Whenever you have a spare moment, you must only yearn, seek, and anticipate getting me out. You must also fast, and on the last day of the year, you must fast, and also not sleep for any entire 24 period. For any entire 24 period, the viceroy went and followed instructions. At the end of the year, on the last day, he fasted and did not sleep. While returning to the castle, he noticed a tree upon which grew. He noticed a tree which grew very beautiful apples. They looked very appetizing. So he took some to eat. No sooner had he eaten of the apple that he was overcome by sleep, and he slept for a very long time. His servant shook him, but he could not be aroused at all. Eventually he awoke from his slumber and asked the servant, "Where in the world am I?" The servant explained to him what had happened. "Where in the world am I?" The servant explained to him what had happened. "You have slept for a very long time, many years. When I have sustained myself from the fruit." The viceroy was extremely distressed. He went to the castle and found the princess and expressed her own great distress to him, who expressed her own great distress to him. "Had you come on that day, you could have taken me out of here. You lost out on account of one single day. Refraining from eating is indeed a very difficult task, especially on the last day when the evil inclination is very intense." The princess was explaining to him with this why she would be now lenient with the instructions and would not be restricted from eating, since it is difficult to restrain oneself. So go again and choose a place where you will remain again for an entire year. But on the last day you will be allowed to eat. However, you must not sleep or drink wine, unless you fall asleep. The main thing is not to sleep. The viceroy went in and followed instructions. On the last day he was returning to the castle. He noticed a spring. As he was returning to the castle, he noticed a spring of water rushing by. It looked red and smelled like wine. He asked the servant, "Have you seen this spring?" One would expect it to be water. But it is red and smells like wine. Viceroy went to taste from the spring, and he immediately fell asleep for many years, for 70 years. Meanwhile, a large troop of soldiers began passing by, followed by their luggage carriages. The servant hid himself from the soldiers. Then a chariot with covered wagons came along. The princess was sitting in it. She had the chariot stopped near where the viceroy was, and she got down and sat next to him. She recognized him. She shook him firmly, but he was not roused. She began to complain to him. For after all the efforts and very great struggles he had endured for so many years in order to get her out, on the day on which he could have saved her, he ruined it. She wept very bitterly over this. How great is the pity for you and for me, for all the time that I am here and cannot leave. She then took the kerchief from her head and wrote on it with her tears. She placed it next to him, got up, sat down in her carriage and traveled on. The bezH eventually woke up and asked the servant, "Where in the world am I?" The servant told him everything that had happened, how a large troop of soldiers had passed, and then a chariot, and how the princess had wept over him and cried out, "How the bezH, and she are to be pitied." Meanwhile, the bezH noticed the kerchief that was lying next to him. He asked, "Where is this from?" The servant answered him that the princess had written it with her tears. The bezH took it and held it up to the sun. He was then able to see the letters. He read what was written in it, all her complaints and cries, and that now she is no longer in that castle. He must now search for a golden mountain and a pearl castle. There you will find me. So the bezH left his servant behind and set out on his own to seek her, traveling for many years. Since he was an expert in geography, he said to himself, "A golden mountain and a pearl castle are certainly not to be found within civilization, so I will go to the wilderness." Thus he searched for her in the wilderness for many years. At some point he came across a huge giant. It was simply impossible that such a huge creature should be a human being. He was carrying a huge tree, larger than any tree that can be found within civilization. The giant asked him, "Who are you?" And the bezH answered, "I am a human being." The giant was very surprised, and he said, "I have been in this wilderness for so long, and I have never seen a human being." The bezH then told him the whole story, and that he is searching for a golden mountain and a pearl castle. The giant said to him, "There is certainly no such thing," dismissing the idea and saying to the bezH that he had been misled with a tall tale. For such a thing certainly does not exist. The bezH began to weep bitterly and said, "Oh yes, it absolutely does exist somewhere." But the giant continued to dismiss the bezH's words and repeated that he had certainly been told a fool's story, while the bezH continued to argue that it certainly does exist. So the giant then said to the bezH, "In my opinion it is a fantasy, but since you are insistent for your sake, I will call all the beasts. I am in charge of all of them. Perhaps one of them will know about this mountain and castle, since they run about throughout the entire world." So we called for all of them, from the smallest to the largest, all types of beasts. He asked them, and they all answered that they had not seen it. So the giant then said to the bezH, "See, you were told a tall tale. If you listen to omaaiiinnn, you'll go home, for you will certainly not find it, since it doesn't exist." But the bezH was very insistent and said that it certainly does exist. The giant and said to the bezH, "Look, my brother lives in the wilderness. He is in charge of all the birds. Perhaps they know they fly high in the sky, and perhaps they have seen this mountain and the castle. So go to him and tell him that I sent you to him." So the bezH continued traveling for many, many years in search of the giant's brother. Eventually found another huge giant who was also carrying a huge tree. This giant also asked the bezH who he was, and the bezH told him his whole story, and that the giant's brother had sent him to him. But this giant also dismissed the bezH, saying that such a thing certainly does not exist, saying that such a thing certainly does not exist. While the viceroy argued that it certainly did. The giant then said to the viceroy, "Look, I'm in charge of all the birds. I will call them, perhaps they know." So he called all the birds and asked them from the smallest to the largest. And they answered that they know nothing about such a mountain and castle. The giant then told the viceroy, "Don't you see that there is surely no such thing in the world? If you listen to me, go home, for it certainly does not exist." But the viceroy continued to argue that it certainly does. The giant then said to the viceroy, "Further on in the wilderness, you will find my brother. He's in charge of all the ways that race the world around the world. Perhaps they know." So the viceroy continued searching in the wilderness for many years, until he found another huge giant, also carrying a huge tree. This giant also asked him as above, and the viceroy told him no story. This giant also dismissed him, but the viceroy argued with him as well. Finally, this giant said to him that for his sake he would call all the winds and ask them. So he called all the winds to come, and they came. He asked them all, and none of them knew anything about such a mountain and castle. So the giant said to him, "Don't you see that they told you a fool's tale?" The viceroy wept bitterly, saying, "I know for sure that it does exist." Meanwhile, another wind came along, and the giant said to it angrily, "Why were you late in coming? I ordered for all the winds to come. Why did you not come with them?" The wind answered, "I was held back because I had to carry the princess to the Golden Mountain and Pearl Castle." The viceroy rejoiced greatly when he heard this. The giant then asked the wind, "What is valuable there?" And the wind answered, "Everything is valuable there." Yeah, the giant in charge of the winds then said to the viceroy, "Since it is so long that you have been searching for the princess and have made such great efforts, perhaps you may now have some financial obstacles. So I will give you this container. Whenever you put your hand into it, you will be able to take money out. You will be able to take money out." The giant then ordered the wind to carry the viceroy there. Yeah. A storm wind then came along and carried him there, bringing him to the gate. There were soldiers standing there who would not let him enter the city. So he put his hand into the container, took out some money and bribed them. He was then able to enter the city. It was a beautiful city. He went to a landowner and rented accommodation, since he would have to stay there for a while. He would need intelligence and wisdom to get the princess out. The rebbe did not explain how the viceroy eventually got her out, but ultimately he did get her out. Look into the introduction and see wondrous allusions about this story. The emperor and the king. There was once an emperor who had no children. There was also a king who had no children. The emperor traveled about the earth searching, that perhaps he would find some advice or tonic that would enable him to have children. The king also traveled about, and the two of them met at a certain inn. Though they did not know each other, the emperor recognized royal manners in the king. So he asked him, and the king admitted that he was a king. The king also recognized royal manners in the emperor, and the emperor also admitted it to the king. Each one told the other that the purpose of his travels was in order to have children. They agreed between them that if after they return home their wives give birth, one to a boy and one to a girl, both of whom would be able to marry, they would marry off the children to each other. Nanach, nachman, meuman, nanach.